The mahogany desk that had belonged to my grandfather seemed smaller than I remembered as I sat across from my Uncle Richard in his corner office. The walls were lined with awards and photographs chronicling 40 years of Martinez Construction's success. A company my grandfather had built from nothing and my uncle had inherited simply by being the oldest son. At 28, I was the only granddaughter in a family of construction workers, the one who chose an engineering school over the family trade, the one who dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the company could benefit from modern project management software and sustainable building practices. My Uncle Richard Martinez, at 58, was everything my grandfather hadn't been: arrogant where Grandpa had been humble, wasteful where Grandpa had been careful, and convinced that his way was the only way simply because he'd been doing it for decades. "Alina," he said, not bothering to look up from the contract he was pretending to review, "I've made my decision." I adjusted my position in the uncomfortable chair he'd deliberately chosen for visitors, too low, too soft, designed to make people feel small. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the construction site where our crews were working on the new downtown office complex, the project that was supposed to be our biggest success, but had become our biggest liability. "You're banned from this company," Uncle Richard announced, finally looking up with those cold gray eyes that had intimidated suppliers and subcontractors for years. Effective immediately. I wasn't surprised. This confrontation had been building for months, ever since I'd returned from NIT with my structural engineering degree and a head full of ideas about how Martinez Construction could evolve. Ever since I'd started questioning cost overruns, suggesting efficiency improvements, and pointing out the safety violations that could shut us down. "I see," I said calmly. "And the reason?" He stood up, walking to the window with his hands clasped behind his back, a pose he probably practiced to look more authoritative. "You're not family material, Alina. You don't understand what it takes to run a real business. All your fancy school ideas and computer programs, that's not how we do things here." My cousin Tony sat in the corner, nodding along like a bobblehead. At 26, he was Uncle Richard's yes man, the son who'd never questioned anything, never pushed for improvements, never suggested that maybe grandfather's 1980s business model needed updating for the 21st century. "You think you can come in here with your engineering degree and tell us how to build things?" Uncle Richard continued, his voice rising. "We've been successful for 40 years without your help." Successful? I almost laughed. If by successful, he meant bleeding money on every project, facing lawsuits from 3 different clients, and operating with safety standards that would make OSHA inspectors weep, then yes, they were wildly successful. The Aurora project is 3 months behind schedule and $2 million over budget, I said quietly. The Harbor View condos have structural issues that could collapse the entire East Wing. And the Jefferson Street renovation is using materials that haven't met building codes in 5 years. Tony shifted uncomfortably. He knew I was right, but he'd never had the spine to contradict his father. "That's enough." Uncle Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You come in here, questioning everything, undermining my authority, making the crew doubt their work. You're poison to this company." I stood up slowly, smoothing down my simple black blazer, the same blazer I'd worn to board meetings they didn't know I attended, investor calls they couldn't imagine I was making, and legal consultations they would never understand. "So this is it?" I asked. "After everything grandfather built, after everything this company means to our family, you're just going to ban me because I care about doing things right?" "This company is mine," he snarled. "I inherited it. I run it. and I decide who's family material and who isn't. You aren't. The irony was almost painful. Uncle Richard thought he owned Martinez Construction because he'd inherited 40% of the shares when grandfather died. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been quietly acquiring shares for the past 3 years through a holding company. Every time a minor investor needed cash, every time a retired employee wanted to sell their small stake, I was there with a fair offer and a non-disclosure agreement. Fine, I said, picking up my briefcase. I'll clean out my desk. Security will escort you out, Uncle Richard added, unable to resist one final humiliation. I don't want you taking any company documents or trying to sabotage anything on your way out. I almost felt sorry for him. In his mind, he was protecting the family business from someone who didn't understand its values. In reality, he was about to discover just how much he didn't understand about the business he thought he controlled. As I walked toward the door, it opened before I could reach the handle. David Chen, Uncle Richard's lawyer for the past 15 years, burst in looking like he'd run up 6 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator. Richard, he said, breathing heavily, we have a problem. A big problem. Uncle Richard frowned. What kind of problem? David glanced at me, then back at his client. Maybe we should discuss this privately. Alina was just leaving, Uncle Richard said dismissively. She's no longer part of this company. David's face went pale. Actually, sir, that's the problem. We can't make any major decisions without her signature. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything. What are you talking about? Uncle Richard demanded. David opened his briefcase with trembling hands, pulling out a thick folder. I just received word from the bank. They're calling in our construction loans. All of them. The Aurora Project, Harborview, Jefferson Street, everything. Tony sat up straighter, finally paying attention. What does that mean? It means, David said, his voice barely above a whisper, that we need to come up with $12 million by Friday, or Martinez Construction is finished. The color drained from Uncle Richard's face. That's impossible. We have assets. We have ongoing projects. Yes, but the bank wants cash, not promises. And to liquidate our assets quickly enough to meet their deadline, we need approval from the majority shareholder. Uncle Richard straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. I'm the majority shareholder. I own 40% of the company. David shook his head slowly. No, sir. You own 40%. But according to our records, someone else owns 60%. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the construction crews working outside, the sound of hammers and machinery that might fall silent forever if Uncle Richard didn't get his signature. That's impossible, Uncle Richard repeated, but his voice had lost all its authority. David pulled out another document. The shares were acquired through Phoenix Holdings LLC over the past 3 years. Small purchases, always just under the disclosure threshold, but they add up to controlling interest. Who? Uncle Richard whispered. Who owns Phoenix Holdings? David looked directly at me. Ms. Martinez does. The transformation on Uncle Richard's face was immediate and complete. The arrogant certainty crumbled, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, then something approaching panic. Alina? He said, my name sounding foreign in his mouth. But you're just what? I asked quietly. Just a college graduate with fancy ideas. Just someone who isn't family material. Tony found his voice. How is that possible? You're broke. You drive that old Toyota. You live in that tiny apartment. I smiled, the same calm smile I'd perfected in boardrooms and investor meetings. Tony, I drive a reliable car because I care about efficiency, not image. I live modestly because I prefer to invest my money rather than waste it on status symbols. Uncle Richard sank into his chair, the weight of reality crushing his inflated ego. The holding company, Phoenix Holdings, is one of 17 investment entities I control. I finished. I didn't just get an engineering degree at NIT, Uncle Richard. I also completed a dual program in business and finance. While you were running this company into the ground, I was building a portfolio. David was frantically flipping through documents. Sir, we need to act fast. The bank wants an answer by 5 p.m. today about the asset liquidation plan. What assets? I asked, genuinely curious. David pulled out another folder. The company owns 12 properties, including this building, the equipment yards, and the residential lots on Elm Street. Total estimated value is about $15 million. I nodded thoughtfully. And the debts? $12 million in immediate loans, plus another $8 million in ongoing project costs and penalties. Uncle Richard looked up at me with desperate eyes. Alina, please. I know we had our differences, but this is family business. Grandfather's legacy. Family business. Grandfather's legacy. The same words he'd used to justify excluding me from every major decision for the past 2 years. You're right, I said. It is grandfather's legacy. That's why I've been protecting it. I opened my briefcase and pulled out my own folder, thicker than David's, more comprehensive, and containing information that would shock them even more than my ownership revelation. The Aurora project is failing because you're using substandard materials to cut costs. I began. Harborview has structural problems because you ignored my engineering reports. Jefferson Street is behind schedule because your project management is stuck in 1985. Tony shifted uncomfortably. Alina, we know there have been some issues. Issues? I looked at him incredulously. Tony, these aren't issues. These are disasters waiting to happen. The Harborview East Wing could collapse in a strong wind. The Aurora Foundation has stress fractures that could cause catastrophic failure. And Jefferson Street is being built with materials that contain asbestos. Uncle Richard's face went gray. That's not possible. I pulled out a thick report bound in blue covers. Engineering assessment completed by Hartwell and Associates 3 weeks ago. I commissioned it myself using my authority as majority shareholder. David grabbed the report, scanning it quickly. His face grew paler with each page. This is bad, he whispered. This is really bad. If any of these issues become public knowledge, the lawsuits would destroy us, Uncle Richard finished, even if we had the money to pay the bank loans. I nodded. Which brings us to the real problem. Martinez Construction isn't just facing a cash flow crisis. It's facing an existential crisis. The business model is broken, the safety standards are compromised, and the reputation is about to be destroyed. Uncle Richard looked around his office. The awards, the photographs, the mahogany desk that had belonged to his father, as if seeing it all for the first time. What do you want? He asked quietly. It was the first time in my life I'd heard him ask that question without arrogance or condescension. I want to save grandfather's company, I said. I want to transform it into something he would be proud of. Something that builds safely, efficiently, and sustainably. I pulled out one final document from my briefcase. This is a complete restructuring plan. New management, new safety protocols, new project management systems, and a 5-year growth strategy that will make Martinez Construction the most respected firm in the state. David took the document, reading the executive summary. This is actually brilliant. The technology integration alone would save millions in project costs. But I continued, looking directly at Uncle Richard, it requires complete operational control. No more cutting corners. No more ignoring safety reports. No more running projects like it's 1985. Uncle Richard stared at the desk for a long moment. The same desk where his father had made the decisions that built Martinez Construction into a regional powerhouse. The same desk where he'd made the decisions that nearly destroyed it. And if I say no, he asked, then Phoenix Holdings will vote to liquidate all assets, pay off the debts, and dissolve Martinez Construction permanently. The family business ends with you. The threat hung in the air like dust from a demolished building. Tony spoke up for the first time in minutes. Dad, maybe we should listen to her. Maybe she knows something we don't. Uncle Richard looked at his son, then at his lawyer, then finally at me. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine humility in his eyes. What would my role be? He asked quietly. I softened my voice. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about salvation. Senior advisor. Your 40 years of experience have value, Uncle Richard. But experience needs to be guided by expertise. And Tony? I looked at my cousin, seeing something in his face I'd never noticed before, relief. Tony knows more about the crews and suppliers than anyone. He'd be perfect as operations manager, once we get him properly trained on modern project management. David cleared his throat. The bank deadline is in 4 hours. I stood up, straightening my blazer. Then we'd better get started. Uncle Richard rose slowly from his chair, extending his hand across the mahogany desk that had once belonged to our grandfather. Alina, he said, his voice heavy with years of stubborn pride, finally giving way to wisdom. I'm sorry. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about a lot of things. I shook his hand, feeling the calluses that 40 years of construction work had earned him. Uncle Richard, grandfather always said that the strongest buildings are built on solid foundations. Let's build something solid together. David was already on his phone with the bank, explaining that the majority shareholder had approved an emergency restructuring plan. Tony was looking at the engineering reports with new eyes, finally understanding why his cousin had been so insistent about safety protocols. And Uncle Richard was looking around his office one more time, but now, instead of seeing awards and achievements, he was seeing the future, a future where Martinez Construction would build more than just buildings. It would build a legacy worthy of the man who'd started it all. Alina, he said as I headed for the door, when do we start? I smiled, thinking about the $12 million I'd transfer from my personal accounts to save the company, the team of NIT-trained engineers I'd bring in to fix the safety issues, and the sustainable building practices that would transform Martinez Construction into an industry leader. We start now, I said. After all, we got a family business to save. 3 months later, I stood in the same office, now my office, looking out at a construction site where our crews were working on the new downtown complex. The same project that had nearly bankrupted us was now our showcase, featuring sustainable materials, cutting-edge safety protocols, and project management systems that had other construction companies calling to ask how we turned things around so quickly. Uncle Richard knocked on the doorframe, holding 2 cups of coffee. He traded his expensive suits for work clothes and his corner office for a position on the construction floor, where his experience was finally being used to build something lasting rather than just impressive. The Harbor View project is finished, he said, setting one cup on my desk. 3 weeks ahead of schedule, under budget, and the structural engineer says it's the safest building he's ever inspected. I accepted the coffee gratefully. And the Aurora project? Completed yesterday. The client is so happy they've already contracted us for their next 2 buildings. Tony appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand and a hard hat under his arm. Alina, the Jefferson Street renovation passed final inspection. OSHA wants to use it as a model for other companies. I smiled, looking at my uncle and cousin, the family members who'd once thought I wasn't family material, who now understood that family meant building each other up rather than tearing each other down. Grandfather would be proud, Uncle Richard said quietly. I walked to the window, looking out at the Martinez construction sign that now included a new tagline, "Building tomorrow, today." Below it, our crews were hard at work on projects that would stand for generations, built with the kind of integrity and innovation that my grandfather had always dreamed of. Yes, I agreed. He would be. My phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. Phoenix Holdings just received another portfolio company acquisition proposal. Martinez Construction's reputation is opening doors we never imagined. I tucked the phone away, thinking about the empire I'd built in secret, while my family thought I was just a college graduate with fancy ideas. Sometimes the best way to save something you love is to take control of it completely, even if that means letting people underestimate you until the moment they realize they need you most. Uncle Richard had banned me from the family business because he thought I wasn't family material. What he hadn't realized was that I was already more family than he'd ever been. I was the one willing to sacrifice everything to save what our grandfather had built. Now Martinez Construction wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And the family that had once excluded me was learning what it really meant to build something together. Sometimes the person who gets banned from the family business is the only one who can save it. And sometimes the signature they desperately need belongs to the person they never should have underestimated in the first place.